Hi, everybody. Hope you're doing marvelously well. Sitting here with the rather lovely Mr. Brad Wood. How are you, my friend?
I'm good, thanks. Good to see you again.
It's good to be seen. We were just trying to think how long it's been. Are we saying 5 years between?
Between 5 and 6.
Wow.
Going
so
on.
this could have been one of the earliest kind of studio tour / interviews that we ever did.
Yeah.
Yowza. Well, there's been some changes. The room, still looks like the beautiful room that you had, but now you've added these funny little speaker things all over the place.
Yes.
You've gone Atmos.
I have. Yeah, I've gone completely Atmos. Yeah, like lost my mind with Atmos.
It's amazing. We did sneakily listen to something in here before we got started. Sounds absolutely incredible. And I wonder, how big is the space? Because this could be comparable for a lot of people that have studios
At home. Yeah, it's 11 feet wide.
Yep.
And 23 or 24 feet deep.
But the back speakers are finishing what, like 7 feet before?
I think about 7 feet. Yeah.
Yeah. So
maybe,
it's
maybe 8. Yeah.
So what's that, like 20? So like 16 by 11?
I think so. Yeah, about that. Yeah, if I remember right.
Which is probably average bedroom, looking at people around here. Lots of nods.
The room itself, without any treatment, it's got a lot of uneven spaces. So the roof is sloped in one direction, which when I first moved here, I thought would be odd, but has turned out to be fine. So there's just not a lot of parallel surfaces and a lot of diffusion going on. Up front here, I've got a fireplace, I've got alcoves, I've got brick, and I've got wood paneling. It's a lot of unusual, diffused materials, which has just worked out really well.
Wonderful.
Yeah, 17 years working in here, and I've things translate really well. It was just I figured it out right away when I came in here and set up temporarily some equipment when we first moved in, and I was impressed by how sort of inert or friendly this room is.
I got to ask you, are you still running? This is me being selfish. Are you still running a cheese grater?
Yeah, 2012. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, I've had it for about a year and a half. It was going to bridge me over to the next bigger computer, or maybe a Mac Mini, M1.
So you're able to run an OS that work. You're obviously able to run an OS on that runs with all of the Atmos system.
Yes, yeah. High Sierra. I would love to be on Big Sur, but I don't think it's compatible with my processor. So I think I'm maxed out on OS. But at some point I'll get another computer. But I bought this one March of 2020. It showed up right before quarantine, and I got it. I always buy my computers used, almost always, and it's been great. I use HD native, and I have a UAD card, so I wasn't really interested in making, if I could keep that same footprint as far as like the layout of the computer, and just buy me another year or two while I was working on the stuff I'm working on.
But then you ended up with a whole Atmos system, and it still works.
It works great. I was prepared to buy a more powerful, newer computer, but it turns out that I don't need it right now.
That's amazing.
Doesn't really tax it at all. The renderer plugin doesn't really use a lot of CPU, and Pro Tools itself is not really being taxed at all.
And you're getting a lot of work going back through your back catalog.
Yes.
Which has been one of the complaints with people listening to stuff mixed by people who didn't originally work on the material.
Yeah.
So that's just fantastic. You can go back to material that you worked on that you intimately know, or probably have to be reminded of 25 years later.
Some of it's been challenging, and also, revealing remembering where my head was at back in the 90s. But it was Emily Lazar, the mastering engineer, who told me last year that Atmos catalog is going to get done, meaning records that were produced prior to Atmos being a thing. And some of those records are going to be ones that I produced. And she thought that it would be smart for me to be the person offering that service, and also the person doing it. If I don't do it, someone else is going to. And that was something that really resonated with me. But it wasn't the only reason. The main reason I got into Atmos was because I flipped out when I heard it. I just loved it, and it was a instantaneous thing. And it was listening to Rocket Man, like so many people, when they get a chance to sit in an Atmos room, that's almost always the first song. In fact, I think Dolby encourages people to play it because it has that, all the qualities that you're looking for. Plus, it's a song that most of us have known since we were kids. So you've heard it 1,000 times, but you're hearing it in a different way. And it doesn't sound like a different song. It's just, you're hearing it in a, you're hearing the same instruments, the same balances, but they're coming at you from different places. And I found that just really alluring.
And it doesn't feel like a gimmick.
Doesn't to me. I haven't really experienced something that sounded gimmicky. I will say this, that when Apple went live with spatial audio, and I was listening with my AirPod Pros, there are some binaural versions of songs that I'm not very excited about. And I don't want to say specific ones, but there have been some failures there. And I don't know what that is, whether that's a problem with the tech, meaning that streaming all the way from wherever it's streaming into your phone and then into your, there's a lot of places where there might be something failing, or it may not be a technical thing. It might be a user problem where there might be Atmos mixes that were created without the opportunity to use the binaural plugin as it's currently been developed. I don't know. It might just be user error. Maybe there's somebody who never even checked the mix on headphones. But I do know that when I do Atmos mixes, listening with headphones in the binaural mode is essential, because there are times when things that I'm doing in this pretty fancy 14 speaker 914 environment doesn't translate into the headphone experience, and I have to either completely rethink that particular sound and that placement, or come up with some sort of compromise, or like dial into why it is that this sound, whether it's guitar or a shaker or a vocal or hand percussion, why that's not translating into this thing. I think that's indicative of how early this actually is for for this technology. I think that there's a lot of hands-on learning, and there's a growing body of information that's being shared. I hope it's being shared, because I want to know too.
No, I agree. I had exactly the same feeling, and I know that was a general criticism of the initial Apple launch, that one of the two featured tracks, remaining nameless but obvious, easy to find out, really was a little too disappointing, wasn't it?
It was really bad. Yeah. But I have also listened to plenty of songs in my life that are just are horrible productions. I mean, bad mixing, bad recording. I mean, God, the missed snare drum on what's the Cars hit off their first album, where he misses the snare. I think just what I needed. When they come out of the first chorus, the drummer he shanks it. He just hits, and when I pointed out to people, they can never not hear it again. Right. And as a kid, I was like, wow, like, why didn't they fix that? Anyway, I think in general, a great song will, a great performance will transcend a technology. But when we're talking about a new technology being applied to something that we've all known and loved, that I think there's every reason to be upset when that doesn't go well. And I imagine that Apple's listening to the complaints, and they're hopefully making adjustments, because it's not in their best interest to have this not go well.
That can only be good for us, because then they're going to lean back on the people that made the records.
Yeah.
And look, if you're a fan of Liz Phair, for instance, you're going to want to hear the person that produced, engineered, and mixed the record do the surround. It makes perfect sense.
It does make
Atmos,
sense.
Sorry.
Yeah. But this goes beyond just catalog. Mm-hmm. So I'm happy to work on the records that I produce that are appropriate or available to mix in Atmos. I'm happy to do that. But it's not the only reason I wanted to do this. It just was an exciting environment to work in. And I haven't yet done new work that's going to be Atmos, like, rendered immediately. Although I've got a couple artists. One is Liz, who cannot wait to start doing that, because that's how she listens anyway. And she's been a binaural head, wearing person like wandering around, on the beach and recording sounds. And her new album has a ton of that. There's recordings that she's done where she puts on, I can't remember who makes it. She told me the manufacturer, but it's basically a binaural head recorder. And she walks around.
We've tried it. It's amazing. I'm blanking on the name, but you put them in your ears.
Yeah.
The microphones are there, and you can have people walk around you.
Yeah.
You can have somebody with an acoustic guitar walk around you while recording.
Yeah, I think she's got some version of that. And when I first met her in '91, and we were really dialing into the recordings, she would just listen on headphones most of the time. And when I was mixing this stuff, we were putting little audio Easter eggs in on almost every song, which I think is part of the reason why people keep returning to it. It bears repeated listening. But she's an obsessive listener, and she's not an audiophile in the sense that she has a really nice home stereo. But man, that woman will put a pair of headphones on and get lost, and she won't come up for days. and so she's already mixing and thinking in a immersive way. She was the first person that ever mentioned the acronym ASMR to me. I didn't know what that was, and she called me on the phone 2013 or 8-9 years ago, and said, "Have you ever heard of ASMR?" I'm like, "No." And she goes, "Okay, I'm going to send you a link." And it was a Japanese woman who's just talking and occasionally opening a thing, like just with a close mic on YouTube. And she said, "I want to make a record that incorporates ASMR. I'm obsessed with it." And her interest in that spurred my own interest in investigating it. It's interesting, it's cool. And then years later, when we finally got together to make this new record in 2019, I brought it up again. You still want to do an ASMR thing? She's like, "Oh my God, yeah, I'd forgotten." Of course. So almost every song has at least a verse where she would sit in that chair and she would have a mic really close. This is after she'd cut all the vocals and background vocals. And she would just record it. And then we'd put it into some sort of environment that would just be there just barely. If you soloed it up, you could just barely hear it. And I just sort of placed that in there. Almost every song has that. In fact, I think every song has her either whispering or just mouthing like the words, and we'd record it and put it in there. And so she's really excited to work in Atmos. I mean, because she's like, "This is literally the thing that I've been thinking about. Like, why hasn't it been like this before?"
Well, one of the things I was talking about this today, when you go back to records that we grew up on,
mm-hmm.
and 60s, 70s, 80s kind of albums that you cut your teeth on listening and really makes you the person that you are. A lot of them have loads and loads of things that would never pass today in a stereo environment. What I mean by that is, I go back to the ska and two-tone stuff that I grew up and loved in England.
Mm-hmm.
When the low end comes in on some of those bass notes, the whole freaking stereo is blowing up. But it's it is cool. You get doom, boom, doom. Now you see, we're so obsessed with everything being perfect
and controlled.
And I think what this environment does is allow the wrongness, because instead of everything being controlled in a stereo environment, you can have something be overly loud in a different place. You can have things blow up a little bit. Because there's more space for it.
I don't disagree with that. And there's been some discussion amongst my friends who are working in Atmos and also just reading online, what are some of the physics about having stereo speakers, like that speaker box and that speaker box, where you've got one element, maybe two speaker elements, or maybe three or more if you've got a bigger box. But essentially, all of the sound is coming through two boxes of speakers, and there's electromechanical limits to everything that we build, right? So you operate beyond its capacity to do the task it's being asked to do, and it goes into harmonic distortion or worse. And the idea that you might take all the big guitars out that normally are coming through with drums and bass and percussion and all the vocals and effects and keyboards and orchestra and everything else. And you put the guitars just through these two speakers. So, Angus and Malcolm are coming out of the wide left and rights. And that's the only task that those speaker boxes have. And this burden has been lessened by at least that amount. I'm wondering about how we as engineers might be approaching like the frequency ranges of like a big ass guitar that's just coming out of one very capable speaker that I don't know that otherwise would be crammed into. Like maybe you're rolling out more because you're pushing into your stereo bus compression, or it may be a mechanical thing that's going on where there's just an awful lot of information for for the throw of a woofer in a single speaker to have to handle, whereas that might not be so difficult for it to handle if it's been tasked with only that particular sound. I have not yet looked enough into that, and the acoustical physics I took in college probably touched on it. I just can't remember, but there is something to pulling these sounds into different specific speakers, and it's not just an immersive environment at that point with me. It's literally like, what will happen if Liz's guitars that are ordinarily coming out of the same speakers that everything else is coming out of are only coming out through here, and maybe we'll put like some sort of ambience that pulls it up into the heights above you or around you. That's a different thing I'm talking about. I'm talking about lessening the load of a stereo mix, and I think that's what you're talking about.
Yeah.
I have a feeling that
being able to take risks.
Well, not even risks. You don't have to think about necessarily about what's going on with your full frequencies. You may not have to worry about 400 hertz with your distorted guitar if it is living by itself in a specific speaker. I mean, I think you still have to think about it because not everyone's going to have multiple speakers to listen to. Most people won't. So you still have to think about your stereo mix. But I am noticing that when I'm mixing a record that was only mixed in stereo, and I'm creating the Atmos version of it. I'm working on Lord Huron's first two albums right now. I'm constantly referring to the stereo mix. I do not want it to sound different from that. I'm trying to be as respectful as possible, but I also want it to be making use of the immersive effect, and so that it gets that same exciting feeling to listen to those songs as I get from listening to Rocket Man and Come Together by the Beatles and all the other stuff that is out there that's really impressive. And what I'm finding is that it's fairly easy with a well-mixed record, a well-recorded record to accomplish the goal. Like it's translating well so far. What I'm finding is that the well-recorded records I'm working on, mixing in Atmos, that I had nothing to do with, it's quite easy to move into this space, and I'm finding it. The lows are lower. Like the frequency response seems to be more full range. I don't know if that's just an artifact of my own wants and desires. My brain might be processing things and telling me things that aren't actually there. I don't know, but I'm loving everything about this. I haven't been this excited about a technology, since maybe since Sound Tools, 1991.
That's incredible. So here we have 3 powered PMCs across the front.
That's right.
Is it literally left, center, right?
That is. PMC 228s. Yeah, so this is an all PMC system, and it's a 914, 9.1.4. And the 9 stands for the number of speakers that are arrayed around you, pointing at your ears. The 1 is for how many subs you've got. I've got 1 Mambo jumbo size sub.
It's huge.
It's huge. And then I've got the 4 stands for how many speakers are above you. And I've got 4 height speakers or overheads, whatever you want to call them. And again, all PMC. And the 9 thing was important to me. I really wanted the wide left and wide right speakers. That to me was the thing that was most impressive when I was listening to other samples of Atmos mixes at Capitol's Atmos Room last year. I just, records that I'd listened to for years, where the acoustic guitars when they come in, they're at the chorus of Rocket Man, they're coming out of these left-right speakers, and now they come out farther away, and it's not what I'm used to, and it didn't disturb me. It thrilled me. I got up out of my chair and I walked over to where, like, what the hell's going on, and I really like that, and that to me is sort of like, that's one of the secrets of Atmos mixing, is the ability to pull things out of the stereo left right, which is oftentimes a guitar. As I use that a lot, electric guitars especially seem to really like being in the wide left and wide right, or I like them being there. I'm definitely one of those people that doesn't like to have soffit mounted covered speakers. I've just never liked that. I like seeing it. It just pleases my brain. I like seeing the drivers moving, and so I played around with grills on these just for fun because they came with them. Why not put them on? And I'm like, nah, I want to see them. And I also like to get up and walk around and hear them. I'm still in the honeymoon phase with these things.
When did you put it in?
I installed it the entire month of July. I did it myself with some help from Ken Sluter, who you know.
Of course, lovely Ken Sluter.
Ken came by on a Saturday, and we hung 3 speakers all day long. It takes a lot of time. It's got to be really accurate. It's got to be within a, eighth of an inch or a quarter inch. That's what those are the specs I wanted to maintain. So yeah, it started July 6th or 7th, and it took me about 3 weeks to get it all set up.
Oh, so when I saw you at the PMC party, you'd probably had it up about a week.
Yeah, definitely. So Ken helped up on Saturday, and then Sunday I installed the rest of them myself, because I think I just needed somebody there to help me figure out how to do this thing to begin with. And it wasn't that hard. It just takes time. Then I took about a week to wire it correctly. It's all wired up.
It looks pretty neat. I hadn't even thought about the cabling. Now I'm looking for it. I can see it.
Yeah.
But there is a beauty in having white walls and white cables.
I know. Check it out. It's not easy to see. Sometimes, like up here on the heights, it's easier.
I see those two.
Contrast with the black.
And I see that one there, but I don't see anything there.
No, it takes time. You want to do it right,
Yeah, it looks great.
And making sure everything's level and pointing, at the right angle. It takes time. You can rush through it if you want, but then you're going to have to move it. And these things, most of them don't want to be moved. And also, I had to install the amplifiers. So the surrounds and the height and the surround speakers, the non-self-powered, needed power amps. So I've got Leah power amps, or LEA power amps. There's 3 of those to power these speakers, and that needed to be installed and wired as well. And they're Wi-Fi enabled, so getting all of the software to work was much harder than the installation. So I also have a new converter. I got rid of my 192 IOs, and now I have Matrix Studio from Avid, and that requires the Dadman software and a network switch. So I bought my first Ethernet network switch, which put me into a world of Dante that I had never ever wanted for myself.
And do you love it now?
I think it's fantastic, and it's really consistent, but it has a learning curve that's steeper than I ever wanted to scale. And the Dadman software is no joke. Like, it is really powerful, but for this old head, it was a challenge. It really was. I broke my brain a couple of times in July, and I made a lot of phone calls to a lot of people, and I was on the internet, till midnight every night, just trying to work out of these binds. But it was also, I knew I was going to get there, and I hired. Well,
now you've got it. If I put it in, I'll be calling you.
Yeah, I'll block your number. I figured with something this big as far as a change, all new converters, man, I haven't done that since 2012. All new speaker system, that's huge, right? Power amps, all new software. I was going to spend the money and hire a consultant to come in, Andrew from RSPE, who sold me the converter, and the dad mom controller. I hired him, paid him his hourly rate to come in and to clean up my messes. I pretty much had things working. I was able to get signal through the speakers. I was able to turn things on and music would play. That was pretty great. But my stops and starts had left some artifacts in there. So he cleaned things up and said, "Oh yeah, okay, you did get sound, but you should do it this way." And that's why I brought him in. It was in order to get me started in this new environment, this new world, with as a cleanest slate as possible. Because I'm a slow learner, and I will walk down every cul-de-sac.
I'm the same way.
And bump back out of it.
Yeah, I have to make the same mistake sometimes 2 to 3 times before I learn. But
there's best practices when it comes to that. Like, you never want to close your profile in the Dadman software this way. Make sure I got a lot of tips. We've been living with this for a few years now. Here's how you can avoid the painful errors that we all made. I'm happy to receive that information. And I'm happy
it's like learning to trash your DAE preferences all over again.
Yes,
You're learning all that.
It's similar to that. Yeah, and again,
silly little tricks we know.
If you're a film or TV mixer, this is really nothing new. But I'm not that guy. I'm a stereo mix, stereo production guy. And I knew that this was going to be, probably the last and most technologically intense, upgrade I was going to do. And I wanted to do it right. And that also means I brought Dolby in to tune the room when everything was up and running. That was worth the resources. I planned for that. Again, I wanted to know once and for all, what is this room doing? I had a feeling, I had a hunch what it did.
Well, quick question then, because I think probably we skipped over it. How were the decisions made on the speaker placement?
Oh, that's through Dolby's own onboarding system. They call it, I think it's called the DART. It's you submit an online form, name, contact information, but then the dimensions of the room that you would like to have a Dolby Atmos system installed in, and then they will get back to you with their their recommendations. And I printed that out, and I just kind of followed that. But I also had Ted White from PMC come by a couple of times, and I always make sure I have good beer when Ted comes by, because Ted will come he doesn't live anywhere near here, so he'll make the drive if there's good beer. So, and anybody who wants to get to know Ted White, don't skimp on the beer. So he'd come up here, and we would talk about like what kind of speaker system, what kind of speakers for this room, and there was a lot of speculation. That in conjunction with Dolby's responses to the information that I was giving them.
Did you take into account any surfaces or anything like that?
Not as much as you'd think, because I'm not a big believer in a lot of absorption in a room. Knock yourself out and dry that room up if you want. It's not the kind of rooms that I like to work in, and I've built plenty of dry rooms.
Yeah, but you have a cloud above here. Yeah.
The minimal treatment has been up since 2004. Right. I built 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 control rooms since 1988.
You also have all your glass surfaces covered, so it's not.
Yeah. There's a little splash coming off that. The biggest question I had was on the side surround, the left side surround, which is mounted over like 2/3 of a window. And I was curious to see how that would look when Dolby was in here tuning the room and feeding pink noise, and they have their mic array set up. I was really curious to see what that speaker specifically was doing compared to its mirror on the right, which is properly mounted on a wall, and almost identical. I mean, we're talking like 1/4 of a dB plus or minus at most, almost identical response. It kind of confirms what I've been operating, the information I've been operating with for 17 years in this room, is that this room sounds good wherever you sit. So you've got 2 guys sitting back here at the back of the room on the couch, which is a bass trap and it's got an area behind it that's also breaking it up and absorbing and just knocking down those big frequencies. But that's not a bad place to sit. There is no place where bass builds up and sounds unpleasant, and there's really no place sitting on the side, standing anywhere in this room that doesn't sound pretty good. And this is a guest house that was built in 1937. I mean, there was no consideration to sonics, to acoustics when they built it. So the fact that there isn't any plasterboard, there's no drywall, there's brick surfaces up front, there's paneled wood with grooves, it's being broken up kind of everywhere. It's diffused like crazy. And so when they tuned the room, it confirmed almost everything that I thought about it. They're like, this is a surprisingly inert space. It's not really getting in your way much, with the exception of some first order reflection on the subwoofer, which went from front firing to side firing in order to knock down that first order reflection coming from the console.
Incredible.
Yeah, I mean they did EQ stuff. They applied a curve that an EQ set that is they think is optimal for mixing in Atmos. So there's plenty of bass management going on, etc.
So in the last 8 weeks since you've had this set up,
mm-hmm.
What have you mixed?
Lord Huron's first 2 albums in Atmos. That's what I've been focusing on. I don't know if I'm supposed to be saying that, but I'm saying it.
I think it'll only help.
Yeah, the newest album came out earlier this year on Republic, and that also was simultaneously released in Atmos. So it's a concept that is not alien to them, and they're excited about it. Rick Parker, who produced the first 2 albums, has been really great about collaborating with me on this. He came by a week ago.
Lovely.
Or actually, no, it was Monday of this week, just to listen to the second album, which I have more or less finished. And I'm waiting for approval from the band who are out playing shows. So I'll have to wait a few weeks. I'm still working in stereo. So I've got records that I'm trying to wrap up, mixes from people who've supplied me stuff online and a couple local bands. So that's still happening. And that was also a complicating factor. If you're building just an Atmos mix room, you probably will have less difficulty than I did. So I'm running a hybrid where I take 8 analog outputs to run into my console here, the little Neve, and through my outboard. I also have 6 outputs, physical outputs, to go to my headphone distribution amp for when I'm tracking, in the live room, which is over there. and I needed to have a complete stereo production and mix setup that's separate from Atmos and with different speakers for the stereo. I add some extra speakers. So that was a bit of a concern, and I had to figure out the best way to get the extra speakers to work in that. And that basically means that I had to take the outputs of my console, have them appear in one of my patch bays. So I had to, wire that all up and sort of think through, like, I wanted the minimal amount of time spent to switch over. So a bit of patching in the patch bay takes about 2 minutes to convert from Atmos to stereo or stereo back to Atmos. But I'm still finishing up stereo mixes. But I'm looking forward to doing just a pile of Atmos mixing because it's just fun. I really love it. At Warren's request, I'm going to show you guys how I work in Atmos. And this is from the Liz Phair album, Soberish, which came out June 4th of this year. And it's my first attempt at Atmos mixing, which I primarily did on headphones because when I was mixing this album, I didn't have the actual physical speakers. I just had the Dolby Renderer plug-in and Pro Tools and a pair of headphones. So Atmos has a binaural setting, which is essentially 4 headphones. And what you'll be hearing is the binaural output. I work from stems with Atmos. I think it's probably the best way to do it as far as time constraints and fidelity to the original stereo mixes. So we've got a stereo mix of drums that I created. And this song is called Bad Kitty, which I think is the second to last song on the album by Liz Phair. And this is me on drums. We recorded this October, November of 2020 remotely. So Liz, during the pandemic, staying home, and I'm working from home. This is my drums, and she's sending me stuff that her son's recording into Logic via Dropbox. I pull it into the session. So any guitars you're hearing, she did at her place in her house. So this is my drumming, and it is just stereo, left, right. I am not putting that into any kind of Atmos environment. I felt like it worked best that way. We have hand claps coming up here, and I'll solo those up for you. So the hand claps are in what they call objects, which is not stereo. Objects are what Dolby uses to refer to the Atmos environment. And the hand claps are, as you can see here, panned to the side speakers. And I'll bring up the renderer real quick, and you can see, if you look at the renderer, there's a little dude there. See him? And the green dots are showing the audio. So those hand claps are stereo stem that are pointed at your head on the sides. You can kind of pan it around to have a look. I've lost many hours playing around with this little 3D. This guy's cool. He gets to hear a lot of cool music. All right, back to the Pro Tools session. We're looking at the render right now. We'll go back over to the Pro Tools session, and you can see the mixer that's specifically for that. I'll bring those hand clap up again. So there's some reverb, and that's in the original track. And essentially, I'm just placing these sounds around the Atmos environment. And again, like I said, these are pointing at your head on the left and right side speakers. Okay, we got more hand claps. I think this is with a reverb. Yeah. And let's have a quick look at the objects again. So you can see they're directed towards the rear of the room. Go back over to the render, and you can see more specifically. They're panned not quite hard left and right, but all the way towards the back of the room. And I'll bring that up in conjunction with the other hand claps we were just listening to. We'll solo both those up, and you can kind of hear them. So again, these are all sounds that exist in the original stereo mix. This is all stuff that Liz and I recorded. What I'm doing now is I'm just pulling them out of stereo and moving them into different parts of the room. You know, these are primarily side and behind you. And that's just really fun. It's fun to play around and experiment. Some stuff is a bit more of a reach and maybe doesn't work as well. Oftentimes drums and bass guitar, lead vocals, I will leave in stereo with an Atmos mix because I don't feel comfortable hearing everything swimming around, all swirling around you. Let's listen where the bongos are. Those sound like they're coming out of the far wide left speaker. Let's take a look. Yep, and up a little bit. So when I say up, that means I'm changing the height, this little red dot. I'm bringing them up into the heights, which are the overhead speakers. We'll go back over to the renderer. And you can kind of see that, yeah, we're pretty much just coming out of the wide left speaker. So let's move on to the acoustic guitars. This is Liz playing 2 tracks of acoustic that I have affected and mixed, again, originally back December 15th of 2020. I created this Atmos version in late May or early June, literally days before her album came out. It was a mad dash. So we're going to listen to this and see where it is in the objects. Sounds like I put a little phaser on there. Kind of monkeyed around with a little bit. Let's go to the renderer. Have a look at the render. So these are living in the secret sauce, I think, of Dolby Atmos for rock music, and that is the wide left and the wide right speakers, here and here. Great place to put rock guitar or acoustic guitar that's chunking away. Makes your mix suddenly wider, and I oftentimes will dedicate those speakers just to guitars. It pleases me. I'm really enjoying it. And I think I might have pulled them, as you can see, they're not quite hard left and right. They're hard left and right, but pulled towards the listener a little bit. So I'm drawing them a little closer. Maybe I was just feeling that intimacy, getting closer to your face as a listener was good. Liz is such a cool guitar player. It's a really simple part. Not a lot going on with the song. It's a lot of ambience. There's the chorus. Next would be bass guitar, which I played here. And that is just in the stereo speakers, or the bed, which is a term borrowed from film and TV. I'm just keeping that simple. I've got a little, let's take a look at what we're doing here. Yep, that is just stereo left, right, but this guy here is the LFE, low frequency energy. That's basically sub, and I've got minus 13 dB feeding into the sub, which is my center, my 1-4, it's the 1. And again, I'm not trying to be disrespectful of the original stereo mix, trying to be sort of faithful to it, but a little low end never hurts. I'm not going to show the render on that because it's actually not using the render. It's coming through the stereo left-right. Listen to that bass playing. Whoa. All right, next is guitar drones. Liz played, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4 tracks of guitar that were individual notes just kind of droning, and then I processed them. So this is electric guitar, I think, that I then processed, and this stuff is using the most out of the Atmos environment. So we'll start with drone 1. And you can see there, active panning. I wrote automation, panning up and down, left and right, going up into the upper speakers, the heights, kind of hanging out in the back in general, or the sides. I'll play a little more of it. And watch the panning. Moving down, now moving towards you, back out, left, right. Heading up. Let's look at the render while it's doing that. So that's drone number 1. Again, that's just an electric guitar that I processed pretty heavily. Here's the second drone. It doesn't look like it was doing any panning on that, automated panning. It's just kind of sitting hard left and right, wide left and right, I should say. Yep. Okay. And then here's the third drone. This is the let's see, what's the Letting the Days Go By? What's the name of that Talking Heads song? You may ask yourself, am I right or am I wrong? Once in a Lifetime. This is our homage to Once in a Lifetime. As Liz playing just pedaling a 2-note drone. And I was thinking David Byrne. So there you go. Let's look at the render. You can see him moving around up above you, right? And we've got another drone. Listen to that. So this is going left, right, up and down and around. They're sort of chasing around. Let's put all the drones up. So that's the drones, and they just kind of are like a maelstrom, and it was intended to be dreamy. There's no guitar solos on this song. It's those sections in between the choruses are meant to just be these static drones, and it was very intentional. And as a result of this sort of Eno Burn-esque My Life in the Bush of Ghosts kind of sound that we already created for stereo, it lends itself to the Atmos environment really well. This is a Kyoto sample that I used on a previous song. Liz had asked me to borrow something from a previous song on the album in order to tie it together. Since it's the last real full band song on the album, she wanted to have some elements that would subliminally sort of remind the listener, harken back to other sounds that were on the album. And that is, looks like it's in the heights up above and sides, they kind of bow down. Boing. And I'm just following like the phrasing. Boing, boing. When it gets to that bottom note, I would have them dip down. You show it again here. Cool. All right. Now we've got lead vocal. And again, this is all of her vocals as mixed in the stereo mix with effects, just printed as stems. And I left those also in the bed, the stereo bed. No objects here. I just tend to think that it translates better. And I think the focus, we're still so used to hearing things in stereo that I think, for me at least, I'm most comfortable hearing vocals and main acoustic drums coming through that stereo. I'm not quite ready to have vocals creeping up behind me, at least not lead vocals.
Is a big dumb cat. It lies around lazy and fat. But when it gets a taste for a man, it goes out hunting for him any way it can. I don't live in a world that appreciates me.
So that's the lead vocal. Here's the background vocal, which is, I think I just created it. I played it. I didn't sing it, but on this record, I didn't sing any octaves with her. On previous albums of hers, like Guyville and Whip Smart, and definitely on White Chocolate Space Egg, I would sing an octave below her, or sometimes an octave above. But on this album, I almost never sang anything. But it sounds like I did, because I would take her voice and manipulate it, play it down an octave, make harmonies. I think we did that here. These, I think, are in objects in Atmos. So let's have a listen to that.
I don't live in a world that appreciates me. You could say that I'm ahead of my time. Misbehaving is the one thing that always makes me grateful. The goddess gave me 8 more lives.
Actually, Liz sang that. That's not me pitching here. But that is literally at the very bottom of her range.
I don't live in a world that
and there's sides, so they're pointing at your ears. We'll add the lead vocal for this chorus. You can have a listen real quick.
I don't live in a world that appreciates me. You could say that I'm ahead of my time. Misbehaving is the one thing that always makes me grateful. The goddess gave me 8 more lives. I don't live in a world that appreciates me. You could say that I'm one of a kind.
So Liz even thought that was me singing in the chorus here.
I I don't live in a world that appreciates.
because it's got that kind of nasally voice that I've got. Wah, you know, but it's actually her just down an octave. Chicago. The last element is a song with not a lot of parts, so we're getting through it fast. This is her singing "Whoa Oh," and I'm sure I must have put that into the Atmos world. Let's have a look. Oh yeah, that's panned wide left and right, but converges on the listener. But it's way in the back of the room. Have another quick listen, looking at the render. So that's completely back there in the rears. Lots of delay on there. While I'm working on this, and any song I mix in Atmos, I'm referring to the stereo mix all the time. Trying to maintain fidelity, not sonic fidelity, but just trying to be faithful to that stereo mix. So I have it set up so I can play back the stereo mix and refer to it. So I'll be bouncing back and forth. I'll play a little bit of the stereo and I'll pop back and forth between that and Atmos. Stereo, Atmos, stereo.
My is a big dumb cat. It lies around lazy and fat. But when
All right, I'm just going to play the whole song in Atmos.